primary goal for this project is to help the Hong Kong science students, in particular for those who are struggling in learning science through the medium of instruction in English. So the primary goal is to launch our genre-based pedagogy to teach science students in Hong Kong how to write better. In particular, we chose the framework of our scientific report. Because scientific report is one of the very common school genre in science, which cover, like for example, a pure scientific investigation. So the student will do a laboratory work, and then will follow the instruction from the lab menu. And after the instruction and observation, the student will write some of the findings and then produce a scientific report. So at the university level, I'm also the course coordinator for all the science students who admitted to CPU. So we also launch similar workshop and course to our freshman year 1 student who embark their journey in the science degree. So we also teach how they can learn better by writing a good scientific report. So we find out that by having a very good awareness about the language they need for scientific report writing, they will be a better position to present their scientific achievement, and then at the end they will have a better science academic results. So that's why this is sort of like the primary motivation for us to launch this project, to hopefully to also equip our school teachers with the school-based curriculum that teachers can use after the project in the current curriculum to enhance their students how to write better in scientific reports.
Today, I am going to discuss the outcomes of the genre-based workshops, including students' pre and post workshop survey results. This includes 2 specific surveys that the students had taken, the scientific writing perception surveys and English perception surveys, as well as covering 2 students' writing samples. And then I'll go through a brief discussion as well as provide some tips for teaching scientific writing. So first and foremost, let's discuss the outcomes. So overall, the trend of the pre and post survey results showed that when we implemented a genre-based approach, combining language and context, we ended up having really positive outcomes that improved students' confidence, specifically in their articulation of scientific contexts, as well as their ability to write scientific reports. So taking a look at student scientific writing perceptions, a pre and post workshop comparison. These are the 5 categories of scientific writing that were analyzed during these surveys. The first category is students' knowledge of purpose and content of sections, which increased 14% post-workshop. Students' confidence to write each section increased by 24%. Students' knowledge and use of strategies for scientific writing increased by 16%. And students' knowledge and use of approaches to writing the discussion and citations both increased by 12%. So overall, we see improvement post-workshop in all 5 categories of scientific writing. And this suggests that the workshop helped to bridge the gap between language and scientific topics, thereby improving students' confidence as independent writers. So next, let's take a closer look at students' confidence across all 4 report sections. So here we can see all 4 report sections, the introduction, method, results, and discussion. And I'll show you that post-workshop, we saw increases of over 20% across all 4 report sections in students' confidence to independently write each section. We can also see more changes in the 5 categories of scientific writing across the other report sections. For instance, in this graph, you'll see the introduction, method, and results and discussion, including pre and post workshop comparisons. In the first category, purpose of writing each section, purpose is defined as understanding and applying content and scientific context appropriately to each section. And post workshop, we see increases of 13 to 18% across the 4 sections. In the category of writing strategies, which include generic, structural, and lexicogrammatical features, as well as the understanding of how to apply the language of science in the students' report writings, we see changes of 18 to 21% post-workshop. and in students' independent writing capabilities, which include students' self-perceived confidence and self-direction for writing, as well as students' ability to create a coherent and congruent report. We see increases of 22 to 26% across all 4 report sections. This suggests that the genre-based approach and workshop help to not only improve students' English and scientific writing, but also improved students' scientific knowledge. In order to produce a coherent and congruent report, it's necessary for students to have an understanding of the scientific method and scientific text analysis techniques. So overall, pre-workshop, we saw that many students had claimed that they understood the communicative purposes of scientific writing. However, the majority of students could not execute scientific writing tasks, and many of them could not use strategies to do so. However, post-workshop, we saw more alignment in students' knowledge and ability to communicate ideas. For instance, more than 50% of the students were able to write independently, and more than 60% of students were able to use writing strategies for self-directed learning and to demonstrate knowledge and scientific methods. So how was the workshop able to improve students' scientific report writing skills? Well, foremost, the workshop taught students how to discuss key concepts, elaborate on the purpose of each section, and apply critical thinking skills in order to write coherent and congruent reports. It did this by providing specific language tools for scientific contexts, like signposting, hedging, or the use of semi-technical and scientific language. And it applied these language tools through specific teaching methods, noticing, exploring, and practicing activities. Noticing activities generally include self-reflection or self-assessment activities. Exploring activities include group activities, and practicing activities are largely independent text writing. All of these activities are used to support and reinforce one another. So moving forward, let's discuss students' English perception survey, a pre and post workshop comparison. So foremost, how was the workshop able to combine language and context to produce self-directed English learners? Well, in this case, we used a dual reflective strategic approach that Dr. Jack Pan had discussed earlier. So first of all, in the reflective approach, students assessed their language learning needs or weaknesses, strengths, as well as any challenges that might come up in report writing. And after doing so, they applied the strategic approach, in which the workshop helped them again to learn and develop new strategies for report writing and English application. And overall, this helped to produce more self-directed learning, which may have a lifetime impact on students' participation in science classrooms and how they conquer learning challenges overall. So let's take a look at the 3 categories of the English perception survey. The first category, English language learning motivations. Here, between the pre and post surveys, we saw a shift from instrumental to integrative motivations. And in the next 2 categories, English language learning fundamentals and English language learning and student behaviors, we also saw upward changes in language learning and student behavior. So beginning with the first category, English language learning motivations, instrumental motivations include career or academic goals, whereas integrative motivations include communication or cultural goals. And post-workshop, these increased by 1% and 3%. And although this may not seem significant, let's take a closer look, because overall, we can see that both types of motivations are very important to students. So when we take a closer look at these instrumental motivations, we see that English is useful in getting a job and English is useful for passing English proficiency tests. We actually see that post-workshop, these decreased by 3% and 2%. Whereas when we look at these 2 integrative motivations, English is useful for communicating with English speakers and for meeting and conversing with diverse people, we find that these increased by 10% and 6%. So what is the rationale of this motivational shift? Well, we found that when we applied language learning strategies to scientific context or scientific report writing genres, we were able to broaden students' concept of their English language communication potential, which may mean that they are also broadening their concept of how to use their own English learning skills. So moving forward with category 2, English language learning fundamentals, we saw that comfort in the English language learning environment increased 11%. English learning strategies, knowledge, and usage increased by 7%. In category 3, English language learning and student behaviors, students' English learning confidence and the embedment of the English communication in their self-concept and English usage outside of the classroom both increased by 9%. So according to these outcomes, we noticed a pathway of student progress through the workshop. First, the workshop provided a positive and communicative learning environment that prioritized student-led learning. It was able to do so in part by applying language strategies that help students participate in activities and discussion, as well as to write their scientific report writing tasks. This increased student concept and embedded English communication concepts within student self-concept. So in the following slides, I'm going to go into more detail about this pathway. However, for the sake of time, I will review them relatively quickly. And if you would like to review these slides in more detail on your own, you'll be able to access them from our website later on. So we saw upward changes in students' perceptions of positive English language learning environment things, including maybe facilitation between discussion and easier for teachers to discuss or understand scientific ideas. This may have overall reduced some of the English language learning related anxieties that might occur commonly in classrooms. We also saw an increase in the use of English learning strategies, including both individual and peer help related strategies. We saw increases in students' English learning confidence, in particular, feeling that they were good at learning English and capable of overcoming obstacles in English learning. We also saw increases in the embedment of English communication related concepts into how students perceived their own self-concept. And we saw increases in students' English usage outside of the classroom or online. So overall, this may suggest that students saw themselves more as English speakers after the workshop. So now I'd like to cover 2 student writing samples. The first writing sample is from the introduction section of a student's report who investigated multitasking during the workshop. And the second sample is from a student's discussion section, and he investigated laughter and happiness during the intervention. In order to analyze these report samples, I'm going to use the 4 criteria of scientific writing, which are organization, content, language, and citations and referencing. And these 4 criteria were also integrated within the workshop teaching methods, as well as the workshop teaching materials. So foremost, here is the student's sample introduction. In terms of organization, it shows coherent flow of context from problem to question, as well as a clear indication of the paper's purpose, using the cars or creating a research space model. Here he defines the context, as well as why the context is important to multitasking, and discusses potential problems, as well as the report's continued focus. In terms of content, there's adequate defining of the problem, phrases, and sources that shape the main themes, describing multitasking, using outside sources to help provide background information, and the main theme of this report. In terms of language, it uses appropriate language and hedging for structural clarity, words like efficiency, contextually, claims. In terms of citations, it reviews current research. We can see this in the second paragraph that can be applied to the present inquiry and demonstrates the research gap. So moving on to the second student sample, the discussion sample. Again, this is from a different student. In terms of organization, it covers important aspects of their findings, linking the entire paper in sections. Here they discuss previous research compared to their current findings. Here they discuss the most significant findings. In terms of content, it integrates comparative literature, summarizes key findings and research questions, and includes other key aspects. Here they do a really thorough job of comparing their findings to previous research findings and discussing the meaning of these findings and results. Here they reapply their context of Hong Kong to their most significant findings. In terms of language, they use appropriate language to guide the discussion using signposting, scientific and semi-technical language. Here we see signposting, semi-technical scientific language. And in terms of citations, they use citations really effectively. They are supportive sources, including both integral and non-integral citations with relatively few errors. Next, I would like to have a brief discussion of these results and outcomes overall. So before the workshop, we saw that students were more likely to compartmentalize their academic goals rather than have integrative or foundational goals. This resulted in more short-term English-related goals like passing proficiency tests or getting good grades. Essentially, English language learning was used as a means to an end. This may be because students lacked confidence in their English abilities or English learning abilities, or may have lacked English language learning opportunities. Therein, students had a narrower perception of their English language and communicative capacities overall, and students did not really visualize themselves as English speakers. However, post-workshop, we saw that when we combined the genre-based learning integration of context, knowledge, and the English language, although this may also benefit EMI teaching, it also helps students to develop learning strategies, which helped them to become independent learners by increasing their confidence in both their learning ability and the application of their current knowledge, regardless of their English level. This also increased the range of their English abilities by seeing their English abilities as more flexible and adaptive to different contexts or genres. They also had more integrative motivations, and English communication became more integral to student self-concept. Overall, the outcomes show that the genre-based learning approach may be a really significant method that could be applied to Hong Kong schools. The genre-based approach is adaptive, flexible, and low cost, and therefore has the potential to increase equity amongst Hong Kong students in terms of English language learning. So next, I'd like to provide some teaching tips for scientific writing. These teaching tips were integrated into our intervention workshops, as well as into our teaching manual and teaching and learning materials, and are also things that I've used myself as a teacher. So first of all, I will follow this via the 4 writing criteria, the first one being organization. We find that students frequently lack cohesiveness within an individual section and the total sections of their reports. Something that can help them, though, is to learn the IMRD model, or the Introduction, Importance, Methods, Results, and Discussion model. And this model is really significant for scientific report writing because it not only teaches language structure and overall organization, but it shows how the scientific method is implemented into the overall report. We can also use several teaching techniques, such as scaffolding knowledge building. In a lesson, we can scaffold knowledge to literally show how lesson and organization and report organization are congruent. We can also integrate more peer reviewing activities or outlines and examinations of scientific texts in order to show organization through different lenses. We can also help students by teaching signposting and transitional language tools, because this type of language is literally the glue that holds ideas together. Next, in terms of content, I think that content is one of the most challenging things to teach students, because students quite often use their own opinions as scientific content, make assumptions, or miss critical information. So some methods that might help them include the CARS method, or creating a research space. Something that's really significant about this method is that it actually has 3 different purposes. The first purpose of the CARS method is to investigate a topic and develop background information. And the second one is to use this background information to identify gaps or potential problems or questions. And the third thing it does is it helps to actually structure these arguments within the report itself. Some teaching methods we can use are regularly throughout lessons combining vocabulary and question asking activities. This will increase student-led learning and discussions. It's important during the lessons to have students help to become the developers of knowledge during the lessons, and then teachers can simply guide them using these methods. It also is helpful to display results with descriptive texts and graphs, and also to have students practice arguing their viewpoints in small groups or presentations. Next, we have language. We can practice and improve our language skills indefinitely, but some content that is especially relevant to scientific report writing includes integrating language learning within the scientific process. This includes corresponding English lexicogrammatical features with both content and report sections, such as hedging, signposting, verb conjugation, and so forth. Some methods for teaching language in specific contexts or genres include simply leading as an example. Leading as an example is an excellent way of teaching language because the teacher becomes a model of language usage. So essentially, when students are partaking in activities, if they're, for instance, providing one-word answers, the teachers can provide immediately feedback, and instead of correcting the student, simply using or repeating the student by using the word in a sentence. This helps to show more flexible language learning that are relative to the activities at hand. It also will help students to model language usage later on in their own speaking as well as in their writing. If students or if teachers are using lexicogrammatical features from writing, like signposting, for instance, in their own speaking, or other organizational or structural factors within teachers' own speaking and lesson planning, students will also begin to mimic those things. Finally, we have citations and referencing. Students often forget to reference scientific information or are uncertain of where to add references or have errors in their citations or bibliography. So it's important to differentiate or help students differentiate between good and bad sources, as well as between opinions and scientific facts. And it's also necessary to teach students how to test the legitimacy of scientific knowledge. Some methods that are helpful in doing this are reminding students of the IMRD and CARS model, since both of those models inherently include resources, background information, and text analyses. We can also provide more easy access guides like posters or handouts to students to help them with formatting their citations and bibliographies. We can also provide more regular practice and reinforcement in lessons. Something that I always like to do is every time that I encounter a new text in a lesson, be it once or twice a week, I always write a citation on the board of that lesson to help students practice formatting a citation quickly, and also to reinforce the idea that citations are significant and important, and over time they'll generate that this is a valuable concept that they will continue doing whenever they encounter a new text. So this is the end of our presentation. Thank you so much for listening. If you are interested in learning more about the project, if you would like more information about the project or to revisit these presentations, presentation slides, or if you would like to download our teaching manual or other teaching materials, you can visit our website at teachingscienceenglish.com. So I guess now we'll have a question and answer Q&A session. So if there's anyone who has a question about today's presentation or our intervention workshop, would you please speak up or write it in the chat box?